My mom threw my graduation ticket to Paris in the trash. She yelled, "You'll never be more than a beggar." My sister laughed. "You don't deserve it." I took the ticket out of the trash and left. 4 years later, I returned to find my family begging for help at my door. My name is Emily Williams, and 4 years ago, my family tried to stop me from flying to Paris for my graduation. That morning, in our Phoenix kitchen, I held the envelope containing my ticket while checking the clock on my phone. I had 6 hours until I needed to be at the airport. My mother walked in, saw the envelope, and her expression tightened. Before I could explain, she grabbed it from my grasp, crossed the room, opened the large green trash can by the garage door, and tossed the ticket inside. My younger sister, Sophia, stood by her and giggled. "What does a beggar like you need a graduation dream in Paris for?" she asked loudly enough to hurt more than a smack. Their laughter filled the entire house. I was frozen for a split second. Then I did. I strolled over, opened the lid, and reached into the sticky, foul-smelling trash without hesitation. I took out the crumpled ticket, rubbed it on my jeans, grabbed my suitcase, and walked toward the front door. "If you walk out that door, do not come crawling back," my mother yelled. I just stopped long enough to clarify that the decision was hers, not mine. 6 hours later, I was in the air, heading to the city they said I'd never see. 4 years later, my home security camera saw 2 worn, anxious faces at my front door, pressing the doorbell as if their lives depended on it. This time, however, the beggars were not me. If you've ever had someone try to throw your future away, stick around, like, subscribe, and share this tale with someone who needs confirmation that walking away can be the beginning of something new. When the jet eventually leveled out above the clouds, I rested my head against the seat and tried to breathe. But my thoughts kept returning to Phoenix, to the insidious decay that had begun long before the ticket was discarded. I grew up in a one-story house on the outskirts of town, in a neighborhood where every driveway had the same crumbling pavement and sunburnt grass. My mother, Rachel, was often fatigued from her job at a big box furniture store, coming in with swollen feet and a stack of invoices to remind us how much everything cost. My younger sister, Sophia, was nearly always on her phone, making little fashion videos or performing postures in the living room as if the entire world was watching her. I was the one who filled the empty places. I opened the cafe at 6 a.m. Took the early bus home, smelling like espresso and sugar syrup, and then spent the rest of my time cooking, cleaning, and taking online art lessons. Every month, I paid a portion of the rent by sliding folded cash onto the counter, and my mother would scoop it up without looking at me, murmuring something about how it hardly scratched the surface. Sophia would roll her eyes and suggest that I paint faster if I wanted to be useful. On paper, we appeared to be a normal working family. In truth, there was a clear rule that no one ever mentioned out loud. My worth was determined solely by what I could offer for them, not by who I wanted to be. I didn't say anything about Paris at first. The concept felt delicate, like a soap bubble that would burst the moment I stated it aloud. Late at night, after they were sleeping, I sat on the floor of my small bedroom, surrounded by canvases propped up against the walls. I painted the same scene over and again. A figure attempting to climb out of a box while hands reach in to pull them back. I emailed images of the sculptures to an international art school in Paris, partly expecting them to ignore my email. When my admission letter arrived, it was in a cheap white envelope with a logo in the corner and my name spelled correctly for the first time in a long time. They offered me a partial scholarship and a place in their graduation presentation. I stared at the words until they blurred because, for the first time, someone who did not know my last name thought I was worth investing in. When I informed my mother, she didn't grin. She looked at the letter as if it were a hoax. "Paris," she murmured slowly, as if the city were an insult. "Who is going to pay the bills while you play artist in France?" I replied that I would work till I went, that the program covered the most of my tuition, that I had savings, and that this was my opportunity. She shook her head and waved the paper at Sophia, as if I was making a joke. "My little influencer," she explained to my sister. "At the very least, you're doing something worthwhile, with a future." She returned my gaze. "Art does not pay the mortgage, Emily. Coffee tips do not keep the lights on. You are dreaming." It hurt because she knew exactly how many hours I stood on my feet to bring those tips home. It hurt much more when Sophia joined in, smirking as if she was doing me a favor. "You are always asking for more time, more understanding, more everything," she said. "Pleading for opportunities. And for what? A depressing artwork in a city you can't afford to live in." She referred to me as a beggar as if it were a punchline and the word belonged to me. That night, as I stood at the kitchen washing their dishes while they laughed in the living room, I understood something I have been trying to avoid for years. In that house, I would never be more than free labor with a sloppy fantasy that they were embarrassed about. They did not regard my admission letter as an accomplishment. They viewed it as a menace. If I left, they would lose the person who picked up shifts, cleaned pans, and quietly paid off late notices. If I stayed, I would lose my one opportunity to be more than a beggar in my own home. That was the anxiety in the air the morning my mother noticed the plane ticket on the counter. That was everything behind her eyes as she walked to the garbage can. And that was all behind mine when I reached in and decided not to stay small just to keep them comfortable. The amusing thing about leaving home is that it does not feel like a movie scene when it is happening. There's no dramatic music playing as you pull your bag across a damaged driveway. There's no slow motion when the Uber arrives. There is only the sound of your own heartbeat and the question slamming through your mind. Are you committing the worst mistake of your life? As the car moved away from our Phoenix home, I watched the front door in the side mirror, half expecting it to fly open and my mother to rush out and scream she didn't mean it. It remained shut. The only thing that stuck with me was the memory of her voice imploring me not to crawl back. On the drive to the airport, my phone vibrated with a text message from Hannah, my best friend from high school. She was the only one who claimed Paris made sense and that my gift was genuine, even though I couldn't believe it myself. She shared a screenshot of the transfer she had made. A tiny amount of money was deducted from her own nursing income. Her message was short. I cannot fix your family, Liv, but I can help you get on that plane. Please do not waste this chance. I gazed at her words until my eyes burned, then typed back a simple thank you, since I was quite sure I would cry loud enough for the driver to hear. When I arrived in Paris, the sun was sinking behind dismal clouds, and whatever romantic vision I had of the city evaporated the moment I walked outdoors. Accompanied by a blast of chilly air, my program had set me a tiny dorm room on the outskirts of town, with a narrow bed against one wall, a little desk against the other, and a window that overlooked a never-sleepy street. I hauled my suitcase up 2 flights of steps, unlocked the door, and realized that for the first time in my life, no one was going to go in after me. Nobody was going to complain about dishes or ask where the rent was. The silence seemed both relieved and anticipatory. The next morning, reality struck. Groceries cost more than I anticipated. My scholarship covered tuition and some of the housing costs, but not the minor everyday expenses that add up quickly. I walked for hours, leaving my resume at cafes and shops, fumbling through basic French and attempting to grin as if I belonged. After 1 week, a little coffee shop near the art school recruited me for early hours. A few days later, one of my instructors indicated that a local gallery owner wanted part-time assistants preparing for an impending exhibition. This is how I met Elise Green. The first time I stepped into her gallery, I was nearly terrified to breathe. The space was simple. White walls, concrete floors, and canvases were hung to allow each person to talk freely. Elise was sharp and composed, with gray hair pushed back and a manner of gazing at you that made you want to stand up straighter. She only glanced at my resume before nodding. We need someone to carry ladders and not drop anything, she stated. Can you handle that? I did. I scrubbed floors, unpacked cartons, and held my arms up till they shook while she determined if a painting should be a half-inch higher or lower. For weeks, I was simply another pair of hands, another student attempting to endure the city. One night, after we had closed, I was wiping down a table when she noticed the notebook poking out of my bag. She asked to view it in a dry, casual manner that nevertheless felt like a test. I hesitated before handing it up. She scanned through page after page of smudged mixed media creations, remnants of ticket stubs, coffee receipts, and paint scraped over pencil lines. Most of them were variations on the same image, such as a figure reaching out of a mound of rubbish or a hand grasping a paper ticket that looked almost identical to the one my mother had thrown away. You are very literal, she replied, snapping the book closed. But you are honest. That was the closest thing to praise I'd heard in a long time. She asked me to email her 3 polished pieces for approval. If she liked them, she may display one in a small area of the gallery. No promises. I remained up for 4 nights in a row, working in that little dorm room, with paint-splattered newspapers on my floor. When I eventually handed the completed pieces, my hands were still soiled with color. A week later, I strolled into the gallery and saw one of my paintings on the wall in the far left corner, with a tiny printed label underneath that said Emily Williams, Mixed Media. I stood in front of it, unable to move, as guests shuffled past with glasses of cheap white wine. The majority did not stop. Several did. One older woman, an American tourist, lingered there longer than the others, tilting her head as if to see what I had hidden behind the layers. She asked Elise who the artist was. Elise pointed at me. The woman smiled as she expressed her desire to purchase the item. The sum she paid was not large. But when Elise handed me the envelope at the end of the night, I felt as if the universe was telling me that maybe I wasn't crazy to come here. That envelope covered groceries, bus rides, and a few nights where I didn't have to worry about missing meals. Furthermore, it compensated for a small portion of my self-respect. I was no longer merely the girl who handed out tips at a kitchen counter and was labeled a beggar. For the first time, I was an artist who was compensated for her labor. What I didn't realize at the time was that this small sale would be the start in a series of events that would lead back to that same term and the people who had used it to break me. Success did not arrive in Paris with fireworks and fanfare. It manifested as early alarms, weary feet, and nights when my eyes ached from looking at canvases under dim dorm room lighting. After that first sale, I returned to opening the coffee shop at daybreak, wiping down tables for people who had no idea my painting was on display at a gallery just a few blocks away. Between lessons and shifts, I continued to paint, filling sketchbooks with the same recurring picture of escape, piling paper scraps and paint until my hands cramped. Elise observed quietly. She did not give many compliments, but she did ask more questions, which was her way of caring. "What are you trying to say here?" she would inquire, tapping a corner of a canvas. "Why are you hiding the ticket under so much paint?" This prompted me to consider my work as more than just therapy. It has to be an emotional story. When my program revealed the final graduation showcase, my students reacted as if it was their big break. For me, it felt like a test. The show would take place in a larger gallery in the city, with visiting curators from London, New York, and Berlin. One piece for each pupil. No second chances. I chose a big mixed media canvas that had taken me 4 months to create. Layers of trash textures, receipts, broken coffee sleeves, and bus tickets surround a single crumpled boarding pass in the center. It wasn't an exact replica of my original ticket, but it captured the memory of it. I titled the piece Exit Wound. I nearly canceled the show the week before. I told Elise it was too intimate, that people would not understand it, and that perhaps I should post something prettier and easier. She cocked an eyebrow and remarked, "In this city, pretty is cheap. Honest is rare. If you are going to take up space on a wall, make it worth it." So I stuck with it. On the night of the show, I stood in a rented black dress and tight shoes, pretending I wasn't going to puke up from nerves. My classmates gathered with their families, speaking quickly in French or Italian, while their parents excitedly pointed to their names on the program. Initially, I stood alone, clutching a plastic cup of sparkling water. Hannah texted from Phoenix while on break at the hospital, sending a photo of herself watching a live feed on her phone. "I am so proud of you," she wrote. "Your family has no idea what they threw away." As the doors opened, the room was filled with conversations and clinking glasses. People moved in front of the paintings like waves, pausing then flowing on without looking twice. For a while, it seemed like no one had noticed my essay. Then a man in his 30s stopped in front of Exit Wound and studied the small card with my name and title. He was dressed like he had just gotten off a plane, with a slightly crumpled blazer and piercing eyes beneath tired wrinkles. He moved closer to the picture, bent in, and traced the shape of the painted ticket with his eyes. "What is the story?" he inquired, looking around till he noticed me standing awkwardly by the wall. For a moment, I wanted to lie and say it was simply about travel or change. Instead, I told him the truth in a concise manner that fit within a few phrases. I explained that my family had squandered my opportunity to go, that I had fished it out of the garbage and left nonetheless, and that this piece was about the cost of walking away from people who did not believe in you. He listened without interrupting and then asked a few questions about my method, prior projects, and plans. After the program, he gave me his card. His name was David Green, and he lived in New York. He worked in technology but was becoming increasingly interested in art. He went on, "My story and my work would resonate in Brooklyn, where half the cities seem to be made of people trying to reinvent themselves." I assumed he was just being kind, but a few weeks later, he emailed to ask if I would be willing to send a few works to a group show in a small Brooklyn location that he was helping fund. It seemed ridiculous to even consider it. I had hardly enough money to subsist in Paris, and New York was an ocean away. Still, I packed 2 canvases, filled out shipping paperwork, and watched as the pieces that had gotten me through my darkest hours vanished into cardboard boxes. Months have passed. I kept working, sipping coffee, and stretching canvases. Then one morning, as I was cleaning tables in the gallery, Elise summoned me to her office. She brought out her phone, an email open on the screen. The subject line included my name and the term sold in all uppercase. One of my Brooklyn pieces had sold. The buyer was David Green himself, who stated in his message that he was more than merely interested in purchasing my art. He wanted to discuss giving it a permanent home. His premise was simple yet terrifying. He wants to build a modest studio and gallery in Brooklyn for artists with experiences like mine. People who were told they were silly, unreasonable, or burdensome. He wanted me to be the first resident artist and co-curator, with my name on the window. My inclination was to shrink back, to hear my mother label me a dreamer, a beggar, and a daughter who didn't grasp reality. But then I remembered picking that ticket out of the trash. The weight of that first letter from the tourist, and every night I'd spent alone in a dorm room, convinced that anonymity was preferable to being seen. I looked at Elise, partly expecting her to say I shouldn't get my expectations up. Instead, she said, "New York will not be kind, but it will be honest, and you, Emily, are finally ready for that." When I stepped off the plane at JFK a few months later, dragging my suitcase into a city that smelled of exhaust and possibility, I had no idea that somewhere back in Arizona, the people who once called me a beggar were already losing everything they had sacrificed for me. While I was working out subway maps and how not to get lost in Brooklyn, my previous life in Arizona was silently dissolving without me. Back home, my empty seat at the kitchen table did not prevent the rent from being due. The invoices kept arriving. However, the girl who used to open the cafe at dawn and slide cash across the counter every week was now pouring coffee for strangers in New York while keeping the money for herself. Rachel first bridged the deficit with additional hours and credit cards. She returned home from the furniture store later and later, kicked off her shoes, and put unopened envelopes onto the counter, as if she could ignore them till they vanished. Sophia reaffirmed her desire to become an influencer. She taped try-on films in the brightest part of the living room, ordered things she couldn't afford, and convinced herself that every purchase was an investment. When a bill arrived in pink or red, Rachel put it on a card and explained that it was temporary. When Sophia asked for another ring light, she remarked, "You had to spend money to make money." Hannah subsequently informed me that if anyone inquired about me, they just shrugged and claimed I was still overseas as an artist, as if I were a child backpacking for fun rather than someone who used to pay half their expenditures. They didn't remark how the house seemed heavier without a second wage. The first big crack appeared when the furniture store reduced Rachel's hours, only to cut them again. Fewer hours equaled less money. The minimal payments developed teeth. Late fees added up. One evening, during supper, the lights went out. There was no storm or warning, just darkness and the sound of a dying fridge. The next morning, Rachel spent hours on the phone trying to buy additional time from companies that don't care how hard you say you're trying. A few months later, she lost her entire job. After that, everything accelerated. They sold a television, a few chairs, and some jewelry. They held a yard sale, and Sophia wore enormous sunglasses and claimed it was merely a decluttering project rather than a survival situation. It wasn't enough. The notice to depart was sent in a hefty envelope affixed to the front door. They relocated to a tight apartment across town, then to a cheap motel, and finally to a shelter smelling of bleach and exhausted air. Sophia finally scrolled past a name she hadn't mentioned out loud in months, somewhere between the second motel and the shelter. A mutual acquaintance had sent an article about Carter Studio, a new studio and gallery in Brooklyn founded by a Phoenix-based artist who transforms familial tragedy into mixed media pieces. The shot showed me standing in front of Exit Wound, with my name emblazoned on a white wall. The caption mentioned a scholarship in Paris and a ticket discarded in the trash. Hannah stated that the room became quiet. Rachel sat down hard. Sophia gazed at the television, as if it would bite her. Everything they had criticized and attempted to crush was right there, being lauded by strangers. The word beggar didn't sound as humorous anymore. Unfortunately, we were unable to feed them. After a few days of pretending that the piece did not exist, they ran out of both pretending and money. With what little money they had left, they purchased 2 bus tickets to New York. Days later, lugging tattered bags and dressed in clothing they'd already slept in, they followed the blue dot on a cracked phone screen through Brooklyn, until they arrived at a glass door with Carter Studio emblazoned across it. They took a deep breath they couldn't really afford before pressing the doorbell. While I was putting a new piece on the wall, my phone vibrated with a security alert. I looked down, tapped the notification, and watched as the live camera stream loaded. 2 figures emerged on the screen, slimmer, older, and unlike the people who had laughed over a garbage can in Phoenix. It took me a whole heartbeat to recognize them. Then I did. My mother and younger sister stood on my front steps, and this time they were the ones requesting not to be sent away. I stared at the screen for a long second, long enough for the bell to ring again, before realizing I was standing in the center of the studio, holding my phone and slightly opening my mouth. David glanced up from his laptop. "Everything good?" he inquired. I swallowed and forced my voice to be steady. "Yeah, just someone at the door," I answered, despite the fact that the word someone did not adequately describe it. My pulse was pounding so fiercely that it seemed to be reverberating off the museum walls. I put down my phone, wiped my palms on my pants, and proceeded toward the entrance. Each step echoed too loudly on the smooth concrete. By the time I got to the door, I had to pause, hand hesitating over the handle, to tell myself that I wasn't the girl from the Phoenix kitchen anymore. I owned this door. I decided who went through it. I opened it slightly to glance outside before swinging it fully open. Up close, my mother appeared tiny. The Arizona sun had given way to New York winters, and her face reflected this. Lines that had not existed 4 years before slashed deeply down her mouth. Sophia stood alongside her, arms wrapped about herself, the bright, shiny confidence I knew reduced to something raw and exhausted. For a period, neither of us spoke. My mother then tried to grin, but it did not reach her eyes. "Emily," she began gently, as if she was unsure whether she still had the right to use my name. "You look good. You made it." I didn't move aside. Instead, I put my shoulder against the doorframe, allowing the glass to separate them from the gallery. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Hi, Sophia." The space between us felt constricting. Sophia broke first. "So, this is really yours," she continued, looking past me to the white walls and paintings. "Carter Studio." "That is crazy," I said, shrugging. Crazy is one word for it. She laughed briefly, although it sounded more like a cough. "Look, we didn't know exactly how to." She began, then paused. My mother cut in. "We came a long way, Emily. We just want to talk." For a split second, I imagined the shelter, the bus ride, and how they must have stared at my name in the studio window. Part of me wanted to soften immediately, take them inside, make coffee, and pretend we were just another family visiting. But that was the same part of me that had worked double shifts, and handed out money while being labeled a beggar. I owed that version of myself more than just a brief fall. "We can talk," I replied. "Out here." My mother's smile faltered. "Out here," she said, as if the sidewalk were an insult. "Why you too good for us now? Why you too good for us now?" I shake my head. "No, but that door behind me," I answered, looking back at it, "is my boundary. I didn't have one in Phoenix, but I do now." She opened her mouth as if to fight, then closed it again. "We are in trouble," she admitted finally. "I know," I replied. "I saw the article. Hannah told me some things." She seemed embarrassed for the first time in a long while. "We lost the house, the job. Things got complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated. That is one way to describe choosing credit cards over hard choices. She flinched. Sophia jumped in, as she always did when the stillness became uncomfortable. "We get it. Okay," she said. "We screwed up. We said things we should not have, but you left. You cut us off. You would not even answer calls." "There were no calls," I replied calmly. "There were never calls to say you were proud, only calls when the rent was due." She began to disagree, but stopped when she realized I was correct. My mother gazed at the sidewalk. "I know we were hard on you," she said. "I was scared. You wanted to chase some art fantasy in Paris while I held everything together. I panicked. You threw my future in the trash," I said, literally. I am not sure there is a softer way to say that. Her eyes welled up with tears, and for a brief moment, she resembled the mother who used to make my kindergarten lunches and braid my hair. "I was wrong," she said. "I thought if I broke your dream first, the world could not do it for you. I thought keeping you close was safer. Instead, I drove you away." The apology did not undo what had happened, but it was more than I had expected to hear. Sophia shifted her weight, looking from her shoes to the door and back again. "I called you a beggar," she explained, the word sticking in her throat. "A lot. Actually, the thing is," she said, looking down at her worn jacket. "Now I know what begging actually feels like. It is not funny." I didn't rush to soothe her. The stillness that followed was not nasty, but just honest. "What do you want from me?" I inquired. No sugarcoating. My mother took a breath. "We need help," she said. A place to stay for a while. Maybe some money to get back on our feet. You are doing well. You can afford it. That old familiar expectation washed over me like a wave. The premise that if I owned something, it was inherently theirs. I stood up and stepped out onto the pavement, closing the door behind me until the latch snapped. You are right about one thing. I told you. I am doing better, but the reason I am here is because I stopped treating myself like the family beggar. I am not going back to that. I am not paying off your choices. My mother's face tightened. So you are just going to turn your back on us? After everything I did for you? I met her gaze. You fed me and housed me as a kid. And I am grateful. I told you. But you also used me. You threw away my ticket to a life where I was not trapped paying for your fears. Both of those truths exist. I am not rewriting them just because it is inconvenient now. For a moment, no one spoke. Sophia sniffed, then wiped her nose with her sleeve. So that is it? She inquired. You have a fancy studio, and we get nothing. I shake my head. No, that is not what I said. I am not going to save you, but I am not going to watch you drown either. I told them about the art program we had launched at the studio, which included classes for people who had been chewed up by life and needed a place to put the parts back together. We collaborate with a local shelter. I clarified. People who commit to the program get help with temporary housing and support while they rebuild. We have more people who need it than spots, but I can get your names on the list. You would come in like everyone else. Help clean, set up, follow the rules, no special treatment, no living in my apartment. No credit card bailouts, actual work, actual change. My mother looked stunned. You would send us to a shelter? I corrected her gently. I would connect you to a support system that does not depend on me sacrificing my life again. That is the only way I can help you without becoming the person you used to demand I be. Sophia opened her mouth to argue, then appeared to deflate. I am tired of being proud and hungry, she said. I am tired of pretending everything is content. My mother gazed at the studio window, where my name was clearly printed. I never imagined you'd be the one closing the door on me, she added quietly. I never thought you would be the one throwing anything away. I swallowed the guilt that line elicited and responded nevertheless. I am not throwing you away. I said. I am throwing away the version of our relationship in which I am the beggar, and you are the ones with all the power. If you want something different, it is there. I glanced at the flyer attached to the glass announcing our upcoming session. But you will have to earn it, just like I did. For the first time since I opened the door, they both became silent, expressing shock rather than fury. They were accustomed to me bending, apologizing, and shrinking. This time, I stayed firm on my own pavement, waiting for their response, knowing that whatever they chose next would reveal more about them than it ever would about me. They did not respond right away. My mother kept looking at the flyer on the glass, reading the phrases about healing and rebuilding, as if they were written in another language. Sophia just kept shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her gaze alternating between me and the studio behind me. Finally, she stated that she was weary of seeming to have it all together when she had no idea where they would be sleeping the following week. My mother didn't look at me when she inquired what the program required, as if she knew she wouldn't like my response. I kept things simple. Show up. Do the work. Tell the truth. Respect the rules. It sounded insignificant, but we all knew it was more than money could fix. After speaking with the shelter coordinator and our nonprofit partner a few days later, their names were added to the list. They began entering twice a week, not through the front door during gallery hours, but by the side entry that went to the workshop space. My mother carried a mop as if it were a strange object, cleaning paint water that wasn't hers. Sophia stacked chairs and washed tables while listening to the stories of people who had slept in their cars, ended toxic relationships, and lost everything without ever calling anyone a beggar. In that room, my family was not unique. They were just two more people who had fallen hard and were attempting to figure out which way was up. For me, those weeks were unusual. I observed my mother pouring coffee for strangers and listening rather than lecturing. I observed my sister give brushes to a woman who was rebuilding her life after years of being taught she was useless. They occasionally made small conversation with me about practical stuff like bus schedules and supply deliveries. However, we did not discuss the past every time we saw each other. The mending did not occur in a single dramatic conversation. It came in tiny instances that were easy to overlook. Like the evening I walked in and discovered Sophia sitting at a table, staring at a blank canvas. She questioned whether it was stupid to paint her own story when she didn't even like the character in it. I told her that was the point. Art was not about praising the parts of yourself that hurt others. It was about chronicling the version of yourself who is determined not to do it again. She laughed once, and then began to paint. My mother took longer. She showed up, finished the duties, and sat quietly in the back during group talks. One night, a man in the program described how his parents forced him into a career that made him unhappy, criticizing him whenever he mentioned what he truly enjoyed. When he was finished, my mother hesitantly raised her hand and claimed she had done something similar, but worse because she had not only derided her daughter's dream, but also attempted to discard it. She didn't say my name, and she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Later, she found me alone and said that while she labeled me a dreamer and made me feel little, she was actually talking to herself. She had been too afraid to take her own chances when she was younger, so she punished me for taking mine. I didn't tell her it was fine. I did not inform her that we were even. I just told her how delighted I was that she could say it aloud. Over the next few months, everything changed piece by piece. My mother learned about a career training program through the shelter. Sophia began working part-time at a thrift store, which she initially despised but eventually came to appreciate when she witnessed how hard people worked just to keep the doors open. They soon settled into a modest shared flat with the other program members. Nothing like the house in Phoenix, but theirs in a manner that the previous one never was. We were not the picture-perfect family. Holidays were weird. There were still days when my mother reverted to old habits or Sophia made a tone-deaf remark that she had to correct herself. But there were often mornings when they came to the studio without asking for anything, just to help set up a workshop or sit quietly in the back while someone else spoke. Somewhere along the way, my fury stopped feeling like armor and became something too heavy to bear. I didn't forget what they'd done. I didn't pretend our history was softer than it was. I just decided not to let that moment over the trash be the only thing that characterized us in my mind. I channeled the remaining pain into new works, paintings about boundaries and second chances, doors that close and windows that open somewhere else. People came inside the gallery, read the small placards, and recognized themselves in the artwork. Some sobbed, some laughed, and some signed up for the next session because they were sick of being caught in the version of their tale that someone else had written for them. I began each new session of the program with a simple talk. I informed them that they couldn't choose what family they were born into or how they treated their dreams. You have no control over who tosses away your ticket, actual or symbolic. But you can choose whether to climb into the trash with it or climb out and continue walking. I reminded them that setting boundaries is not treachery. It is survival. Forgiving someone does not entail giving them your life to break all over again. It means regaining control of your life. Looking around the half circle of faces listening, I noticed people from various backgrounds, each clutching their own version of shredded tickets and slammed doors. Some have been termed lazy, theatrical, and selfish. Many of them have been called beggars in some form or another. I always ended the stories in the same way. In the end, I informed them that my retribution was not seeing my mother and sister arrive at my door with nothing. My retaliation was to construct a life so strong that their brutality could no longer shake it, and then to use that life to help others stand up as well. If you're listening to this, and feel confined, I say into the microphone. Keep this in mind if your family, boss, or town doubts you. You are free to outgrow those who refuse to grow alongside you. You are free to walk away from anyone who considers your dreams as rubbish, and you are perfectly free to create something lovely out of the scraps they attempted to bury you in. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who will follow you and require confirmation that it is feasible.